Well, that was fast, wasn't it? I had a feeling that that rumour wasn't true. But having said that though, this is good cause for a point of discussion. Could Oscar Piastri's position at McLaren be more complicated than we thought? Or is Helmut Marko basically just screwing around with people? It's probably a bit of both. If you're unfamiliar with what went down yesterday, allow me to give you the full rundown. As McLaren and Red Bull are going at each other's throats, there are going to be times where both teams will want to trade barbs with one another and attempt to destabilise their opponent. I mean, I don't think you need me to tell you about what's going on between Zak Brown with Andrea Stella backing him up toward Christian Horner and Helmut Marko. They say this for that, tit for tat, and saying Red Bull's a toxic work environment, whereas Red Bull and Max Verstappen clap back saying, oh, McLaren sure do complain a lot, which is now being exacerbated by the whole what is a track limit and what isn't a track limit that's still going on, and now McLaren's launched a right to appeal regarding the situation in Austin, which might see Norris's podium being given back, or maybe nothing, and it might just lead to a clarification of the rules. At the same time though, all of these comments aren't exactly inaccurate, but it is getting to the point that more of the stuff that's happening off track is prioritizing the stuff that happens on track. It's getting a little bit skewed, wouldn't you say? But now it's gone to a whole other level of furore with the rumours that broke out regarding not Lando Norris, but by bringing Lando's teammate into the mix, Oscar Piastri. The rumours circulated were in regards to the talks that Red Bull's advisor Helmut Marko claimed had been undertaken between himself and Piastri's management. And upon first reflection, when you realise who Piastri's management is, and that is of course Mark Webber and his team, then you might actually think that, oh, maybe this rumour has some legs to it, because Mark used to race for Red Bull. He might not want the same thing to happen to Oscar that happened to him, so maybe he's just looking for a really good deal perhaps, just searching around for the next phase of his young driver's career, which might be understandable, and that if Oscar didn't get that, then he and Mark would show no mercy. They would just simply leave. In the case of Alpine, it was the prospect of not getting a race seat coming for him in 2023 or seemingly ever. And as for McLaren, it might be the potential dithering in regards to either equal status being the norm or Lando Norris ending up the preferred driver for the foreseeable future. Now, let me preface this discussion by saying that I am not thinking that this rumour is remotely true. I don't think that this is going to be happening anytime soon. Oscar is perfectly happy where he is, and not even 12 hours after the rumour came out about him being in potential talks with Red Bull, did Oscar come out and say, yeah, that's not true. And I just like to think that maybe people are talking, and then as all the videos have been coming out, Oscar just randomly comes in with a mic and just goes, hello. I love that introduction. He just jump scares everybody. And also, you've just got to laugh at the amount of headlines that have been generated from just this statement, so brace yourself. Ahem. Let's put it this way, said Marko. Mark Webber is intensively seeking conversation. That was it. That's all I could find, since I tried to look on F1 Insider's website, which is where the rumour came from originally, and I searched for Piastri. I couldn't find anything. It does give you some pause for thought. It's just so open-ended. You can't help but ponder about the ramifications, even if it isn't true. Is this supposedly to replace Sergio Perez once his contract is up if they don't take up the 1+1 deal? Is it to replace Max Verstappen, perhaps, if he gets bored of Formula 1 and Red Bull are looking for a new leader of the team, and it might not be Checo? It might be Oscar instead. Or, as is probably the case, is this just yet another phase of Red Bull trying to undermine McLaren? After getting bored of doing it with Lando Norris, they're now going after Oscar and trying to exploit the connections that Webber has with the operation. But as I touched upon, Oscar was very, very quick to dispel the rumours, very, very bluntly in fact, so here's what Oscar said in response. Ahem. Oscar. Sorry about that. No, sorry, wrong quote. Definitely not. I'm very happy where I am. I'm under contract for the next 2 years after this, and I'm certainly not looking to go elsewhere. It wouldn't be a week in F1 without some comments from Helmut. Good one there. It's a nice compliment, I would say. But again, I'm very happy with where I am. They have quite a big pool of drivers that they can choose from if they want. And the whole debate regarding Yuki Tsunoda and why he isn't even getting a chance to even test a Red Bull unless it's being grudgingly given at the end of the season, that's still up in the air. There's Hajar and Lindblad, there's plenty of other options. Why do they have to look outside again like they did with Sergio Perez back in 2020? But don't be surprised that maybe in the next 24 or 48 hours you get responses and rebuttals from Zak Brown and Andreas Stella completely lambasting Helmut Marko for daring to question the integrity of Oscar Piastri and his future with the team. But when you step back and look at the bigger picture here, you do have to admit that the whole idea of Oscar's future is quite fascinating, and the amount of kudos that he's been able to have generated regarding him from people like Max Verstappen. Could he be involved in the mind games regarding McLaren and Red Bull? I mean, I don't really see that happening fully because Max is quite a straightforward person. But then again, Max is quite open regarding his compliments about the Australian driver. Because usually Max doesn't comment on drivers and their place within their teams that are not from his wheelhouse. But with Oscar, he mentioned that he was too good to be considered second fiddle, and that he was a great F1 driver. For Max to call somebody great is not something to take lightly. And I think one thing that's become very clear is that Dutch people, they're very straightforward and frank with you. They don't make any bones about what they are talking about. And trust me, I worked with quite a few Dutch people back in the day, myself and my father, and they will just say as it is, really. They don't really give you any short shrift, and they will just at least tell you what they think. And then you only have to go back to a piece from a while back when Max was asked who he would have as his F1 drivers in the team that he would manage if he couldn't race himself, and he would choose both Norris and Piastri. It's quite evident that the Australian has garnered the respect of the multiple world champion. I don't think Max is trying to have a go at McLaren or anything like that, other than any comments aimed directly at him. That's not really his style, and also he's got plenty of other things to be concerned about. You know, trying to secure his 4th world championship. But you do have to look at his comments as to the value of Oscar and where he might stand in Formula 1 in a few years' time. You only have to look what Oscar's doing with the Ferrari drivers, with that of Charles Leclerc having that fantastic battle in Baku. Him really establishing himself as a front-running driver for right now and certainly in the future. And you might be thinking that I'm being biased toward Oscar and that the last couple of races haven't exactly been glowing for him, but every single driver has their off times. Even Charles, Max, Lando, they all do. And I am certainly managing my expectations for the here and now regarding Piastri. But you've certainly got to look at his long-term potential and the ceiling that he has, considering that he's a couple of years younger than Lando and where McLaren are right now, and what they might be looking to for a future driver lineup. And I reckon McLaren is entirely aware of the value that Oscar has, and is he going to be leaving anytime soon? No, because we need to see what happens in 2025, because that could be more representative of any potential movements from both McLaren drivers and Sergio Perez, because he's definitely contracted for 2025, and 2026 might be a little bit more open, but again, we need to wait until this time next year before having more concrete evidence. But what I do find curious about this whole situation, and a lot of my followers were actually pointing this out to me in the comments on social media like Twitter and Threads and what have you, is that whenever there are rumours regarding Piastri, he and his team are very quick to either dampen it down or completely laugh it off the stage. Whereas with Lando, all the stuff regarding him and potential moves to Red Bull, it's allowed to linger for that little bit longer. Because for the last couple of years, Lando has very much been the apple of Red Bull's eye, and a very major candidate to either partner up with Max Verstappen or to replace him should he move on and choose another motorsport in which to partake in. And as a result of this being allowed to fester for a day or two or sometimes several days, it really starts to make the idea of Lando's future at McLaren seem to be quite debatable. Whereas with Oscar, no, it's very simple, it's very direct, and it's not allowed to propagate. And do you recall the supposed open invitation that former teammate to Verstappen Alex Albon said was knocking around between Red Bull and Lando for quite some time? The Thai driver was implying that should Lando feel confident enough to rub shoulders with Max in the same operation, then the team at Red Bull would gladly take him on board. Make no mistake, if Red Bull were to recruit Norris to either work with Verstappen or to replace him, then the amount of interest and hype regarding that move would be immense amongst the driver's fan base, as well as the entire culture of Formula 1 fans that have recently arrived. And you've only got to look at history to really be proven correct, because every single time Norris's contract has been up for renewal, Red Bull starts to come out of the woodwork and then cluck about, oh, well, you know, we do see Lando potentially as a future Red Bull driver, you know, if things don't work out with McLaren, you're happy to come along to us. Every single time. And then every single time, Zak comes out with a vest pocket maneuver of a contract that just comes out of nowhere saying, no way, Lando's staying exactly where he is, yeah! Sorry about that, my throat's a little bit off at the moment, so I can't do the whole Zak Brown shoulder pat, yeah. But then there've been comments recently, and Marko really spread fire around when he said that Lando had supposed mental weaknesses, which makes me reckon that maybe Red Bull aren't quite so keen to have Lando with them anymore. I mean, Marko, no, that's completely uncalled for, and it does make me think that really, right now, given the really tense situation between these two teams, this might be an example of Marko trying to stir human effluence around a bit, as is the case with these supposed comments regarding Piastri and Mark Webber having conversations with Red Bull. But the point is, though, is that more often than not, the buzz around Norris and his future movements is rarely quashed by Norris himself with immediacy or with a degree of finality, or sometimes he even contemplates a move before then kind of laughing it off and then moving on to another topic. And do you recall all of the rumours and the stuff that were going around last year when Liberty Media got involved and they were sort of encouraging Helmut Marko to maybe seek an opportunity with Lando Norris to partner Max Verstappen to boost ratings and stuff like that in a season where there was really nothing exciting going on except Fernando Alonso getting so many podiums? That was absolutely nonsense and ridiculous, and oof, oh dear. So yeah, with that bomb having been dropped a few days ago, Marko's comment, if true, had moved on to Piastri, and on the surface you might think there would be a kernel of truth to these rumours. You've only got to look to Mark Webber himself, who still is a figure at Red Bull, and occasionally comes on board to race some of his old cars for them, most recently at the Festival of Speed. By the way, who's down for a meetup at the Goodwood Festival of Speed next year? I'm certainly going to get myself some tickets. But it does make sense for the topic of Oscar to have arisen between Mark, Christian, and then eventually the Austrian advisor. It's not like there's no direct connection to the team, but then again, there's also a very clear motivator in which to get under McLaren's skin after all the shots fired by them toward Red Bull over the course of this year. And Marko's job is now to hit the team where it hurts, something that has become clearly the pride and joy of the organisation. Sure, McLaren have designed a really good car this year, the best that they've been able to design in many years. But one thing they hold in high regard is their driver lineup, which I would say is certainly one of the most accomplished lineups on the grid. But it does make you hark back to the Alpine incident and perhaps gives you a clue as to the inner machinations at McLaren and subsequently any other team that might actually take on Piastri. But one thing has become quite evident is that wherever Oscar Piastri chooses to lay down his hat, that is his home without question. Or that hat has to have the same place that the other teammate has. It cannot be the lesser of the two places where a hat is laid. I don't know where that analogy went, but there you go. Equal status at the very least, minimum. I think McLaren are quite aware of this and the volatility, potentially, of the connection and relationship that the team might have with Piastri. If so much as a toe is put out of line, then Mark Webber might want to look elsewhere, especially in 2026, if McLaren doesn't produce a car which is still right at the top of the field. If another team does better, then Mark will simply go over there and say, hey, my driver wants to have the lead role, and they might go, yeah, sure, sign up, yeah. And then in the same time, in the background, you only have to look at what's going on with the McLaren junior driver program. Yes, they actually have a junior driver program, and the amount of drivers they've taken on board in the last year or two is absolutely nuts. It's almost been as prolific as what Red Bull have been doing. Yeah, I'm really thinking that Zak Brown is looking to the future and all of the junior drivers in karting and F4 and hoping against hope that there is a star in the making that could be a really good insurance policy. I've been saying that Piastri is the insurance policy to Lando Norris, but now I'm starting to think they're looking for an insurance policy for the insurance policy. But do I really think that Oscar is itching to go somewhere else? No. I think there is truth in what he is saying, that he is happy where he is right now. I don't think he's going to be doing anything hasty with Red Bull, since they could easily get the new rules wrong, or the Red Bull powertrain partnership with Ford produces a dud, echoing memories from 2014 when Renault, who had now acknowledged the dropping of the ball with the V6 program, came up with a relative bad car. There is no need for Oscar to look elsewhere, or for any driver for that matter, unless their contract is up at the end of next year, as is the case with Sergio if Red Bull chooses to not take up the +1 option. And then all of these teams and drivers have just got to understand where they are, lay the cards on the table, and hope that the driver, if the team has not got it right, chooses to stay with them out of faith. But I do think McLaren are probably sweating buckets at the moment behind the scenes to manage the power dynamic between its figurehead Lando Norris and the coup that was securing the services of Piastri back when McLaren had stumbled and started 2023 looking worse than Alpine. Oh, how things have changed since then. And some people might call Piastri and his team cold and calculating, only thinking to serve themselves, and using any team they race for as a vehicle for their own ends. We saw all of that come out of the woodworks after Monza, am I right? But I would counter all of that with the comments that Piastri made when he did sign with McLaren in 2022. In that he really appreciated the fact that a team such as McLaren with their storied history wanted him specifically. And of course, he is a back-to-back junior world champion, so there would be a degree of demand for the services of Piastri. But then you've only got to look at what was going on with Alpine, with them messing him around and not giving him a proper formal contract and trying to play chicken with Fernando Alonso. And trust me, you do not want to play chicken with Fernando Alonso because you are only going to lose. I would understand that that same argument could be used for the supposed advances from Red Bull and Verstappen, but I'm not entirely certain these advances would benefit anybody, whereas with the ones at McLaren, it benefited many parties. It gave McLaren comfort after the Daniel Ricciardo experience disappointed. It gave Australia a new star to circle around, Jack doing firing it up even more now. And also it gave Formula 1 a bit of young blood at a time where we were thinking we were going to be seeing little of that. And I'm glad that that's no longer the case. F1 next year is going to be filled with young talent really trying to scrap it out there. It's going to be so good next year. Oh my goodness, I can't wait. And I just don't see any benefit of Oscar going to Red Bull right now. I just don't see this making any sense, especially if Verstappen is going to be his teammate. The only way it would work is if Max allowed him to do his thing and not pull rank should Piastri outperform him on a given weekend. If they could work together comfortably as equals, and the talk that Max has generated about having respect for him is legitimate, then perhaps maybe it could be a remarkable lineup, which is actually quite harmonious. But I do temper that also given the history of people who have worked alongside Verstappen. You know Albon, who I mentioned earlier, he's also talked about the struggles that are actually manifested when you are a teammate to Verstappen. We saw that plainly with Pierre Gasly. Is that, sure, Max might say that he's completely cool with his teammate, that he doesn't care who it is, that doesn't really bother him. Yeah, that's all well and good. But when it comes to his management, they really do care. The influence that that team has built around this driver at Red Bull, would another driver even be allowed to prosper at the expense of the Dutchman? Yeah, Max might not be bothered, but his father and management are. But when it comes to the future of McLaren as to who is going to be their lead driver up until maybe the end of the decade, I think McLaren is just holding off on making that decision and waiting for next year to see where things go. If Lando Norris takes on board what he has learnt from this year when battling Max Verstappen on the track, and then is able to kick on massively for next year and really showcase Lando Prime, then the situation, the conversation, well, it's moot. Lando's going to be their lead driver. What's going to happen with Oscar? Well, that might be a conversation for another time. But 2026 is when Piastri's contract ends, and I wouldn't see that contract being extended if it becomes clear that Zak Brown and company chooses Lando and will always stick with Lando. And then it might end up evolving into a situation that you get a Red Bull with Verstappen, that whoever becomes Lando's teammate is going to be compromised and will always be the second driver for as long as Norris is in Formula 1 and is wearing papaya. I'm certain that Mark and Oscar are exerting their influence behind the scenes, and the Hungarian Grand Prix is a major example of this. The softly approach toward Lando and the team order is too obvious. And whilst the Austrian has acquiesced for this year, and is aiding Norris wherever he can and the need is called for, since its own ambitions for 2024 I reckon have been easily met and exceeded, which I believe is getting your first win and maybe finishing in the top 5 of the Drivers' Championship. I think Oscar has a good chance of maybe getting 4th. 2025 will not be nearly as gracious because you've only got to look at the two men leading McLaren at the moment. Zak and Andrea have clear preferences. Zak prefers Lando due to the history they have together. They both came into the McLaren fold at roughly the same time and have grown together. There's that connection that cannot be broken. And then you've only got to look at Andrea, who really backs Oscar, given the fact that he recognises characteristics that other F1 championships have had. And Andrea has been around the block around Ferrari. He's seen so many world champions arrive at that team. So he really does have good qualifications, and he came to McLaren with Fernando Alonso, which really shows you the respect and the appreciation that the Spaniard had for the Italian, now team principal. By the end of 2025, we'll know exactly who the leader is at McLaren, and the loser will make their move. Which one will be the loser? Well, I'm going to defer that for the time being, and I'm going to leave that to you in the comments to debate. But a debate that is certainly brewing right now is over at Williams with the arrival of Franco Colapinto, him upturning the furniture that is Alex Albon there, him now admitting to perhaps maybe looking to Franco's setup for this weekend's Mexico City Grand Prix. To find out why I think the situation is bigger than most people think, go and watch this video next. Seriously, Alex should be quite worried about this and he needs to step up.